Howdy, folks. Max Volume here. The B.A.T. Bantam has given me fits trying to do this particular video. This is a tough one. One thing that stumped me was the ABC mosquito engine, which there are no pictures of that I could find. And it came to be because Harry Hawker, Australian test pilot for Sopwith, yes, that Hawker, as in Hawker Hurricane, bet Granville Bradshaw, the designer of the ABC Dragonfly engine and the proprietor of ABC motorcycles, that he couldn't design and build an even numbered cylinder radial engine. Granville Bradshaw went ahead and built one, a 6-cylinder engine, and he only built one of them. And that's the one on the prototype Bantam. So the only pictures there are that I can find are actually on that particular aircraft with the airplane. And by the way, the mosquito engine was made by using cylinders from the ABC Gnat, made it to a radial crankcase. Granville Bradshaw sold ABC motorcycles to Sopwith, who then went out of business shortly after the World War. The B.A.T. FK-22 and FK-23 Bantam. In 1917, Frederick Coulhoven left the Armstrong Wentworth Company to become chief designer of the newly formed British Aerial Transport Company. His earliest known design for the B.A.T. concern was the FK-22, a small single-seat fighter that had some unusual features. The FK-22 was a 2-bay biplane. The wings had wide-span center sections, both of which were attached directly to the fuselage. Most of the undersurface of the lower center section was covered with plywood. The pilot sat with his head and shoulders in a circular opening between the spars. The fuselage filled the interplane gap completely. Remembering his pre-war experience with depredusins, Coulhoven designed a wooden monocoque fuselage for the FK-22. It had ash formers and was covered with birch 3-ply. In cross-section, it was a near ellipse. The fin was built as an integral part of the fuselage and was covered with birch 3-ply, as also was the forward portion of the tailplane. The wide-track undercarriage had independent suspension for each wheel, using vertical coil springs moving inside the front leg of each V-strut. Power was provided by the new experimental 120 horsepower ABC Mosquito engine, a 6-cylinder radial mounted on a duraluminum plate. It had a small conical spinner on the air screw, but was also flown without this refinement, the engine then having a hemispherical cowling through which the cylinder heads protruded. Apparently, the B.A.T. FK-22 was designed as a private venture. Its construction was authorized by official license number 11. No contract was given at this time, and the first aircraft appeared without an official serial number. Subsequent records suggest that it may have been allotted the number X1. It was known as the B.A.T. B.A.T., a name that was not official. It seems that the FK-22 was completed in August 1917 and first flew in September or early in October. On test, the FK-22 did not prove to be satisfactory. Some, but not all of its troubles were attributable to the mosquito engine, which had apparently been installed in the airframe before it had been adequately tested. The design must have been considered worth developing, because a contract for the construction of prototypes was given to the B.A.T. company. The contract was for 6 aircraft to be numbered B-9944 to B-9949. It seems that the first 3 prototypes all had much the same basic fuselage, but represented at least 2 variations of the FK-22 design. The first and third aircraft were intended to have the 170 horsepower ABC Wasp 7-cylinder radial. The second prototype had the 100 horsepower Gnome Monosupapi rotary. Some records indicate that the Wasp-powered aircraft had the designation FK-22/1, and that the rotary-powered version was the FK-22/2. Apparently, all 3 aircraft had been completed by December 1917, during which month the original FK-22 was dismantled for spares. One report suggests that no Wasp engines were available when the first FK-22/1 was completed, and that it made its first flight late in 1917 with a 120 horsepower ABC Mosquito. The performance of the FK-22/1 with the Mosquito engine was so poor that the Royal Aircraft Factory made an investigation of the engine and air screw. However, with the ABC Wasp engine, the aircraft had a satisfactory performance, but the engine gave a foretaste of the waywardness that was to become its most exasperating characteristic and was replaced by another Wasp in February. Makers' trials of the B-9945 indicated the need for an increase in the size of its tail surfaces. After modification, the aircraft went to Martlesham on the 19th of January 1918 and underwent official tests there during the following month. Apparently, it was considered likely to be useful as an advanced training aircraft for fighter pilots. The official report noted that the B.A.T was very quick and light on the controls, but was critical of several structural features. It noted that the tailplane, being built into the fuselage, would be extremely difficult to dismantle or replace, for it could not be taken off without removing the fabric and ribs completely from one side. The internal control lever for the elevators was too inaccessible for normal use, and the monocoque fuselage was not considered suitable for a training aircraft, owing to the difficulty of repairing it. B-9945's stay at Martlesham Heath was brief. Its official tests were over by 9th February 1918, and it was allotted to the training division. At a later stage, its monocoque engine was replaced by a 110 horsepower Leron. When, under the first official scheme of aircraft nomenclature, the Wasp-powered FK-23 was designated Bantam 1, the FK-22/2 was given the name Bantam 2. 12 Bantams of the final design were ordered. Of these, at least 9 were built. These aircraft had constant chord ailerons of increased span on all 4 wings. An enlarged rudder of characteristic profile was introduced at this stage and remained standard for the type. The horizontal tail surfaces also underwent minor modifications. The span of the elevators was slightly increased, but they were still widely separated. 2 Vickers guns were installed, low down within the fuselage. It was in this form that the Bantam arrived at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough, on 26 July 1918. It had been flown from Hendon by Peter Legge, the B.A.T test pilot. This was precisely 1 month after the Technical Department fortnightly progress report had recorded that trials of the 3 Wasp-powered fighters, the Bantam, the Snail, and Wagtail, had been suspended until engine troubles had been overcome. These troubles were never overcome. A Bantam of the final batch went to France in late summer of 1918. With it went Peter Legge. It was flown at Villacoublay, presumably for evaluation purposes. One of the French pilots who flew this Bantam was the celebrated Roland Garros. The revised Bantam was fast and maneuverable, but had alarming spinning characteristics, the speed and range of its auto-rotation being abnormally great. Recovery from a left-hand spin could be sudden and violent, but to the right the aircraft spun fast and would recover only slowly with a considerable loss of height. At the Royal Aircraft Establishment, a Bantam was fitted with enlarged tail controls, first with a rudder of 50% greater area, then with elevators of 50% more area, and finally with both enlarged surfaces fitted. It was found that the behavior and controllability of the Bantam were greatly improved, the greatest improvement being afforded by the combination of the standard rudder and enlarged elevators. The official report concluded that the only modifications required to render control of the Bantam aircraft satisfactory is to increase the chord of the elevators by 6 inches. A later 1925 investigation concluded that the combination of narrow gap and zero stagger present in the Bantam was likely to make recovery from a spin difficult unless the center of gravity was well forward. By September 1920, the Bantam was no longer needed. Its Wasp engine was known to be a failure, and the B.A.T. company had been disbanded. By January of 1919, the Bantam was officially regarded as abandoned. Farnborough continued to use one for some years, however. In January 1920, two Bantams that had been bought back from the government by the B.A.T. company were converted for the 200 horsepower ABC Wasp II. But the engine was no more reliable than the Wasp I, and development was not pursued. 7 of the Bantams acquired civil identities, F1661 becoming successively GEAYA and HNACH. In the latter guise, it had a 200 horsepower Armstrong-Siddeley Lynx engine, an enlarged rudder, and horn-balanced elevators, and achieved a speed of 246 kilometers per hour, 153 miles per hour. Its cockpit was moved aft, behind the upper mainplane. One aircraft went to the USA, where it was flown at Wilbur Wright Field with the number AS94111, and as project number P167. This Bantam was placed in store on 30th September 1922. The Bantam was an aircraft that, given a reliable engine and appropriately modified and developed, might have made a considerable name for itself. The B.A.T. FK-25 Basilisk. As a successor to the ABC Wasp engine, Granville Bradshaw designed the ABC Dragonfly, a 9-cylinder radial that promised a remarkable power-to-weight ratio. The Air Board ordered over 11,000 Dragonfly engines, and many British aircraft designed in 1918 were intended to have this power unit. One such airplane was the B.A.T. Basilisk, a stumpy, ugly little biplane that had a monocoque fuselage, 2 bay wings, and sturdy divided undercarriage favored by Koolhoven. In the Basilisk, the fuselage was relatively shallow, and a large hood-like decking was fitted in front of the cockpit to enclose the guns and shield the pilot. The gap was increased and the upper wing raised well above the fuselage. There was no center section. The halves of the upper mainplane met at the central end strut. 3 prototypes were ordered, and work began in the spring of 1918. The fuselage of the first aircraft was almost complete by the end of June 1918, and this first Basilisk was destroyed on 3rd of May 1919 while on a flight from Hendon. It caught fire in flight and crashed at East Finchley. B.A.T. test pilot, Peter Legg, lost his life. The second Basilisk was completed in 1919. It differed from the first in having horn-balanced ailerons and a deeper decking in front of the cockpit. This aircraft was tested at Martlesham in October 1919, when the performance figures were established. These are considerably more realistic than the figures, presumably provided by the manufacturers, that appeared in contemporary publications, crediting the Basilisk with a speed of 162 miles per hour. Frederick Koolhoven left the B.A.T. company at the end of 1919. Development of the B.A.T. types ceased. In particular, the Basilisk was apparently abandoned at about this time. Apart from Koolhoven's departure, however, the aircraft could not have succeeded, at least while powered by the capricious Dragonfly engine. A Bantam was restored in the Netherlands for a static display. Here's the video. When the British Aerial Transport Company closed down in 1920, the Bantam was part of the property bought by Ogilvy Aviation, a trader in second-hand aircraft and parts. After Mr. Ogilvy's death in 1953, the Bantam remains, one cut-up fuselage plus wings of two different Bantams, were donated to the Shuttleworth collection and stored in a barn for many years. In 1975, the remains were moved to someone who planned to restore the Bantam, but the material got returned in 1989 without any work done and some vital parts lost. Around 1990, it was decided that only aircraft collected by Richard Shuttleworth himself would be kept in the Shuttleworth collection, and the Bantam remains were offered for closed bids. Thanks to the enthusiastic support from Stichting Vroege Vogels, Early Birds Foundation, the newly formed Koolhoven Airplanes Foundation was able to make a bid for this last surviving original Koolhoven aircraft in the world. All other gentlemen welcomed the thought of this and withdrew their bids. In 1991, the remains of the Bantam arrived at Hangar 8 at Schiphol Airport, and a restoration team was formed. After survey of the material, it was decided to take all the parts in one identity and reconstruct it to one original aircraft for static display. During this process, drawings of all parts were made to document the aircraft in detail, to build a Bantam in flying condition. To have a connection between the Bantam and the Netherlands, it was decided to finish her as the civil K123. With this registry, the aircraft was a daily highlight of the ELTA in 1919, the first big aviation exhibition in the Netherlands. K123 and Koolhoven's private Bantam GEAJW together daily performed aerobatics that thrilled the audience. In July 1918, K123 was flown to France in order to be tested, together with two other Allied types, against a captured Fokker D-7. The Bantam proved to be superior to the D-7 in 2 out of 3 tests. The Bantam was extremely fast. In those days, fighters had top speeds of 90 to 115 miles per hour. The Bantam reached 142 miles per hour. The restoration of the Bantam started with a careful selection of the aged and corroded material. 3 wings appeared to be in such good shape that they only needed repair. The fuselage, however, was cut up in many pieces, yet front and tail sections had survived. With an archaeologist approach, it was successfully reconstructed and rebuilt upside down, using the top longeron as a datum line. Most steel parts were badly corroded, as were the aluminum fillers used all over the place. Without exception, steel nails had been used in the wood, which in 80 years had corroded to 10 times their size. They had to stay in the wood where they were. The static Bantam is fitted with the original Wasp engine. The flying Bantam will need a reliable replacement, as the Wasp was known to be very unreliable because of its poor design and construction. A jar of synthetic glue, almost the same as used in 1918, was obtained from Guy Black in England, and flying wires could be bought from Brutons in Scotland, the same manufacturer as in 1918. The restoration was done the hard way. Wherever possible, broken parts and pieces of wood were repaired instead of replaced. Thanks to this meticulous approach, the reconstruction of the Bantam consists of an exceptionally high percentage of original material, 90 to 95%. In August 2003, the B.A.T. FK-23 Bantam from 1917 is restored to its full glory. 12.5 years to turn a pile of firewood into a beautiful, swift-looking aircraft. 5 engineers have spent their time on the Bantam, along the way helped by some 20 other people involved in providing skills, knowledge, or parts. These people can look at their work with great satisfaction. It has become a museum piece of great historical value.